In AQA English Language Paper 1 Question 4, you'll be directed to a specific part of the text and given an opinion on it, perhaps from a student or a reader. You'll then be asked to what extent you agree with that opinion. The assessment objective is AO4, to evaluate text critically and support this with appropriate textual references. Let's look at a typical question. Focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source from line 18 to the end. A reader said, when Brightly is in the church, he enjoys his time there, and it has a positive effect on him, even though his life is hard. To what extent do you agree? In your response, you could consider your own impressions of Brightly, evaluate how the writer has created these impressions, support your response with references to the text, 20 marks. So the first thing to say here is that you can agree, disagree, or have a balanced view. All three approaches are valid, so there's quite an element of free choice in this question. Now, as a 20-mark question, you should spend around 25 minutes on question 4, and that means you've got enough time to reread the section of the text in question and make your mind up whether you will agree or disagree or have that balanced view. The key skill in question 4 is evaluation. You're evaluating essentially two things. Number 1, the ideas in the source in relation to the statement in the question, and number 2, the methods used by the writer to convey these ideas. A continual sticking point for many students has been with the evaluation of methods, so let's look at that in more detail, focusing on that second bullet point to evaluate how the writer has created these impressions. The wording here can vary slightly. Sometimes it's been evaluate how the writer conveys something or evaluate how the writer creates a sense of something, but the point is essentially the same thing, to evaluate the methods the writer has been using. Now, there's been some confusion with this question at times, given that it's not assessing AO2, the use of language and structure. The question is, well, which methods can I actually write about? Well, the good news is I've looked through the past mark schemes and you can write about pretty much anything. Language, structure, tone, linguistic choices, irony, themes, message, morals, symbolism, imagery, sentence length, verb tense, narrative voice, form, contrast, colour imagery, religious imagery, sensory description, and that's just the things that have come up in the papers we've had so far. In other words, you can write about any method the writer has used if you feel that method has created the impression you're writing about. Now, all I would do, and it's something you can do as well because this paper is available free of charge to download at mrbruff.com, is I would reread the source from line 18 onwards. Obviously, I've already read the whole thing once at the beginning of the exam, so I'm familiar with the story, and I might have some ideas about the question already, and I would underline or circle or star anything that seemed to be important in helping me to make a decision on whether when Brightly was in the church, he enjoyed his time there, and it had this positive effect on him. And I might look at this sentence: a hymn was sung about Jerusalem the Golden, where happy souls were indulging in overeating themselves in a sort of glorified dairy filled with milk and honey. And I might pick out some of the language choices there which seem to suggest that positivity, the religious language of Jerusalem, souls, glorified, and perhaps the positive imagery from golden and happy. And those, of course, are just language examples, and it's not that you just look at language, but that's the sort of approach I would take. Let's have a look at a sample paragraph which explores the methods of imagery, contrast, and irony. I agree with the reader that Brightly enjoys his time in the church, and it does have a positive effect on him. Even once he's left the church, he's still thinking about his time there, and the song he heard for some days. In fact, it has such a positive effect upon him, he even visits a public library to look up Jerusalem on a map of the world. However, what it is that he enjoys is the song about milk and honey, and the irony is that although the church gave him hope, it did nothing to satisfy his hunger, and he left the warm church without any of the promised milk and honey. This imagery of the warm church contrasts with the description of the barren village and piled rocks where Brightly spends the rest of his time, and this contrast illuminates how little Brightly has and how the joy he takes from the song is only ever fleeting because it describes a place that is out of Brightly's reach. Therefore, the positive effect it has on him is merely superficial and has no real tangible benefit to Brightly's life. Now, as you can see in this paragraph, the two evaluative skills are there. There's the evaluation of the source in relation to the statement, where the answer suggests that brightly is indeed positive, but it's superficial and fleeting. And then there's the evaluation of the methods the writer uses, the methods of imagery, contrast, and irony.
I hope you found this video useful. If you'd like to see a longer video on this question, then you can see one just here. Click on the screen and you'll be taken to that video. Please do subscribe to the channel.